Dear Mythology, sometimes I want you to be as exciting as the books that Rick Riordan writes. Not even that, maybe something that'll be interesting for kids, maybe something that'll interest them a little more. Like, for example, Rick Riordan's Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Egyptian mythology in some sense, but that's neither here nor there. I just wish sometimes you'd make it fun. Just fun. Signed, a lover of mythology. Like I said, mythology is fun. Mythology is interesting. Some of the backbone of mythology is books. In this book talk, we're actually going to be talking about two different variations of books. One is written by Rick Riordan, which is The Lost Hero, which is the first book of the Heroes of Olympus series. The next book we're going to be talking about is called Pegasus, the Flame of Olympus, which is written by Kate O'Hearn. So I'm going to talk about Pegasus a little bit more because it's not something I'm used to. It is different. When I went into it, I was expecting more of like a Rick Riordan style, which is very disappointing on my behalf because I shouldn't have done that. I should have treated it like its own special book instead of pretending it's something that it's not. So what Pegasus is about, let me see if I can read the synopsis. When Pegasus crashes onto the roof of Emily's Manhattan apartment, her life changes forever. Emily is thrust into the center of a fierce battle between the Roman gods and a terrifying race of multi-armed stone warriors called the Nereids. She must join forces with a thief named Helen, the goddess Diana, and a boy named Joel to return Pegasus to Olympus and rescue the gods from a certain death. Along the way, they will fight monsters, run from a government agency that is prepared to dissect Pegasus, and even fly above the Manhattan skyline. It's all part of the quest to save Olympus before the Olympic flame burns out. So this is Pegasus. I wonder if you can see it's not a good quality, but yeah, so this is Pegasus. It's actually not bad for a book, especially when it's mostly about a winged stallion named Pegasus. So if you're not familiar with Pegasus, so Pegasus is the child of Medusa and Poseidon. Well, in this one is actually a Roman telling. They use Roman gods, so it's technically Neptune, but that's beside the point. Pegasus is the child of Medusa and Neptune, and that's a myth that I'm not even going to get into right now. It's not something I expected. It's actually not that bad, like I said. I would highly recommend it only because it is very much different to what Rick Riordan writes. It's not something. It is set in Manhattan, which is in New York. It doesn't use anything to cover up that there are gods. In most of this book, it seems like the gods are mostly secluded on Mount Olympus. They don't really go into the mortal world, especially because in this book they constantly ask, like, well, where are the gods? Why aren't they usually on Earth? It's just interesting in general, and it is set in like two different perspectives. One perspective is Emily, who is the main protagonist of the book. I don't know how old she is. I think she's 11 or 12. She's 11 or 12, I think. And she is the character that meets Pegasus. She falls in love with Pegasus in a kinship sort of way, like friendship. And she gets help from a boy in her class named Joel, who I would describe as hot-headed. He is very angry at times. He's very hot-headed. He doesn't know how to control his anger issues. And I think that's just because of how his past is written. I wish that was written a little more deeply, but we do get some of his background in there anyway. Um, and then there's Palin, who is a thief in the book. He's not in Roman mythology. I think he's just a character that Kate O'Hearn made up. I think I didn't do a lot of research on this, unfortunately, so I don't know who Palin is. And then one of my favorite goddesses, Diana, who is the Roman equivalent of Artemis, who is the goddess of the hunt and the moon. And I like how she's written in this one. She is very motherly, which is very nice, and much better than what she's actually portrayed as at times, which is, I don't know. It's hard to describe how Diana is described in ways because there are stories where she does turn men into game or deer, as I would say. She's just very nurturing, more nurturing than what I would expect in the Rick Riordan series, because in Rick Riordan, Artemis or Diana is not really nurturing. She's more of like a leader, which she kind of is in this one, but not too much. And then, so one of the main antagonists, there's two main antagonists. There's the Nereids and then the CRU. So the Nereids are pretty much mythical monsters. The only way I can describe them is if you guys know what Pokemon is, I would describe it as like a terrifying and monstrous Machop. I think that's Machop. I don't remember at the top of my head. Anyway, yeah, so it's like that. And then there is in the mortal realm, there is the CRU, which is more about taking or figuring out if aliens exist in the world. And they are very aggressive, they're very violent. It makes me want to go into the book myself and beat their head against the wall, pretty much. And that doesn't really happen in a lot of books, so I really like that she did that, which is interesting. And this book is actually is part of a series. So this is the first I've heard of it. Really good book. I would recommend if you actually do like Roman mythology more than Greek mythology. They're pretty much the same thing. It's just that Roman mythology is more about war strategy instead of in Greek mythology. I think they're just goofing off and just having fun. But yeah, highly recommend it if you're really into Pegasus, if you want to learn more about the Roman mythology, or if you just want a really good book about a girl and a horse. Horse girl. Yay. And then the next one, also this one I would recommend for like middle schoolers mostly. But if you are an adult or if you are in high school, you can also read it too. It's just entertaining. Highly recommend. And then the next book I want to talk about is one of my favorite series, The Lost Hero. So The Lost Hero is actually part of the first book of the series of Heroes of Olympus, which is a continuation of the Percy Jackson books. So a lot of you are familiar with the Percy Jackson books are. They're pretty much just Greek retellings in a way that middle schoolers and high schoolers, maybe elementary schoolers, probably the 5th or 6th graders, can understand. And so what I like about it is that this one is not cutting, well, what I like about it is that it's just different than the Percy Jackson series, mostly because it starts off the same way. Percy Jackson series is about, it starts off Percy Jackson in a bus on our way to a field trip and then figuring out that he's not who he seems to be. Pretty much he is a demigod. The same thing with this one. So Jason Grace in this book, he goes on a field trip. He doesn't remember who he is. He does remember who he is, but he doesn't know where he is, who anyone else around him are. He doesn't know anything at all what's going on. And the only person that seems to know kind of what's going on is Coach Hedge, who, spoiler alert, a satyr. And Piper and Leo, who are also the characters in this story. I'm going to show the book a little bit more. They go on this field trip. Jason gets a whirlwind of trouble and he figures out that he's not who he thinks he is. He sort of figures out that maybe there's something special about him, but not to a degree. Same thing with Percy Jackson. They don't know because, like, they're human. They just found out they're demigods. What is interesting about this one in particular is that it's in 3 different perspectives. So there's Leo's, Piper's, and Jason's. In the Percy Jackson series, it's mostly just in first person, and we're following along with Percy Jackson's story. This one we're following along with 3 teenagers who are traveling around to see if they can find um, Hera, who is also Juno. So with this one, it also does some Roman mythology. Mostly of it is just Greek mythology because it is set in Camp Half-Blood. And Rick Riordan does a good job because it's interesting. You figure out more stories, not just about Greek mythology, but more about like the Roman mythology as well. And also Roman equivalents of the Greek mythologies. Like for example, he actually did put an index towards the end of the book. That way people won't have to get confused. Here. Gods in the Lost Hero. Right here. I wonder if you can see it. Right here. So I'm just going to pick a random one off the list. So Aphrodite, for example, the Greek goddess of love and beauty. She was married to Hephaestus but loved Ares, the god of war, and Roman form Venus. That's what I like about it. He actually does put an index of like, hey, so we do know this Greek version of this person, but did you know that there's a Roman equivalent? Which is exciting. I highly recommend for people who fell in love with the Percy Jackson series in general. It is different because Percy Jackson's not in this story in general. He is mentioned a few times, but it's mostly just the story of Piper, Jason, and Leo. And it's pretty much the start of the prophecy, which if I can remember what it is, 7 half-bloods must answer the call, I believe. Sorry, I'm not prepared at all. 7 half-bloods must... So it's called the Prophecy of Seven. So it's 7 half-bloods shall answer the call, to storm or fire the worlds must fall. An oath to keep with the final breath, and foe bear arms to the doors of death. So it's pretty much the start of that prophecy. It's the start. That's what Rick Riordan is doing. That's what he's been doing since the beginning of the book. In any of the book series that he's written, especially with the Egyptian mythology, which is I can't remember off the top of my head. But he does do the Norse mythology. That's also a good equivalent of him setting up the setting and the plot of the stories. And it's just interesting in general because not a lot of authors can do that. They don't set up the books the way they want to. They should set up the books to build up the plot. If you know how many books are going to be in this series, it's helpful to know exactly what you need to do in order to build up your audience. And what I like about it is that a lot of these characters are familiar. Like, for example, there is a villain here. Her name is Medea. Medea was the wife of Jason, I believe, and she was promised to marry him, but he goes back on his word and marries someone else, and she gets pissed. Oh, look up that story. It's very sad. The Greek play is also depressing. Very highly recommended to those who love the Percy Jackson series. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. You can just start in this book and just continue on. You might get confused on what's going on, but it's not like you're gonna get lost and you have to like pick up the Percy Jackson series. Even if you do, the library has them, or you can just get it online. Depends. But it's just you can read it as a standalone. Like I said, it does mention like some of the previous events in the Percy Jackson series, but you don't have to read it. You can just read this and you'll be fine. But it is recommended if you want to. It's up to you. Otherwise, just read it by itself. And what I like about them, they're stepping stones. They're stepping stones to a whole world of not just Greek mythology and Roman mythology, but also other mythologies. Mayan, Egyptian, Norse, etc., etc. What I like about the Rick Riordan, what he's doing right now, it's called Rick Riordan Presents. And what he's doing is he is getting other people to tell their stories of mythology. Excuse me, sorry. and they're writing what the stories that they know. For example, I don't have it with me, but there is a story called The Storm Runner, which I believe is a storm runner. What it is, it's uh, Mayan mythology. And it's actually very interesting because I don't know too much about Mayan mythology. I do have a book on it, but it's just interesting because it opens a whole new world to different mythologies that's not just Western. There is Native American mythology. There's different variations of the Native American mythology. There's also Aztec, Mayan, and Incan mythologies that probably differ from one another. I don't know. I don't know much about the mythologies, but I would like to learn. It helps that way. Children, kids, teenagers, etc., they can research on their own. If they don't even like these Greek mythologies right here, they can just search for something that they like, something that speaks to them in a way. And I think that's important. That's what Rick Riordan is doing, and that's what Kate O'Hearn is doing. They're trying to open up a whole new world of mythology and stories. That way people can get interested in them and they can do their own research on what is not being told to them. They can research about what happened with Medusa and Poseidon. They can research on what happened with Medea. Like I said, it's fascinating. I wish stories, mostly mythologies, get retold. That way they can have a wider audience. I wish I can learn more about the Hindu mythology. I can learn about um what's another mythology I can think of? Um So the continent of Africa. The continent of Africa has plenty of mythologies. I'm sure that is entertaining and useful. The only one I know about, only because of American gods, is Anansi, who is a trickster god, and his form is sometimes a spider. And that's only because of American Gods, which is by Neil Gaiman. I also have it with me. I don't want to get it out because I'm tired and lazy. But open your world to Greek mythology. Read these books. They're entertaining. If you don't want to read them, search up Rick Riordan Presents. He does different mythologies. And if it's something that you don't like either, if none of the stories you like either, Google. Search for something that you like. Search for mythology that you want to study. Otherwise, mythology is not for you. This has been a book talk on mythology. Hopefully, these have sparked your interest a little bit. If not, oh well. Thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully, I won't have to do this again, but hopefully, I'll see you next time. Bye.